Hey guys, I hope you're all doing alright. So in today's video, what I thought I'd do is I'd basically run over all 23 of the MCU movies and just sort of break down what happens in each of them. Because I know a lot of people they're really interested in the MCU and they want to watch all the films, but there's 23 films now and people just don't have the time to watch them. So I thought I'd just do a quick recap. I say quick, I'll probably end up going on for about an hour, but I'll try and make it as quick as possible and just recap all the films so you're ready for the new films coming out, beginning with Black Widow in, no, not October, November. So let's kick it off with the film that started it all, which is Iron Man, which came out in 2008. So basically, in this film, we see the origin of Tony Stark. He starts out and he's a weapons manufacturer. He doesn't care what's happening. He's making money, sleeping around with girls, playing in casinos, gambling. He's just living a fun, enjoyable millionaire life type of thing. And then obviously he shows off his weapon, the Jericho, and gets attacked by a terrorist group and then captured. When he's captured, he meets Yinsen in the cave, and them two start developing an Iron Man suit, the Mark One armor, which is the big silver grey armor. Oh, big silver grey. Silver grey, that's not a thing. It's silver, but silver and grey are like similar colours, but silver grey, that's not a thing. I've just made that up. The silver armour then, and he escapes the cave with that, and then he starts working on Mark II Iron Man suit, and that's when we finally see him turn into this Iron Man character. Like, don't get me wrong, by the end of the film, he is still very jokey, he likes the girls and all that type of stuff. But this is the film where we see him become Iron Man. Obviously, a big part is his heart he gets shrapnel in his heart, so he gets the arc reactor put in, and that's a big part because obviously that powers most of his suits, and it comes back in Iron Man 2 quite a bit as well, because it's making him ill. So that's basically the first Iron Man film. There's not too much to it really, tying into the wider universe. I mean, the post-credit scene though, we see Nick Fury introduce himself to Tony Stark, and he says like we're putting together a team and all that type of stuff, and things like that. So that's kind of the first initial hint at the Avengers. After Iron Man, oh, that sounded a bit funny there. Oh, throat went. After Iron Man, so we go into The Incredible Hulk, which I think was also released in 2008. And in this film, we see Edward Norton as Bruce Banner. He's already transformed into the Hulk and he's on the run in Brazil. But then obviously a bit of his blood gets into one of the drinks in the factory he's working in and kills Stan Lee, unfortunately. So General Thunderbolt Ross hires Tim Roth's character, Emil Blonsky, and a special operations team to come and capture Bruce Banner. But Thunderbolt Ross is actually evil and wants to take his blood and try and use it to create something similar to the super soldier serum that we see Captain America get in the first Avenger. So he's kind of got evil intentions. And then obviously Bruce Banner is in love with Betty Ross, which is Thunderbolt Ross's daughter. So there's a bit of conflict there as well. So this film doesn't really tie into the wider universe that much. What we see in the film is Bruce is on the run, they come after him, they try and capture him a few times, there's a few Hulk outs and he has a few fights and bits and bobs like that. Then we see Tim Ross and Emil Blonsky get transformed into the Abomination at the end of the film, and we see him and Hulk have a massive battle. Then Bruce goes back on the run and he stays in touch with Betty through emails and letters and things like that, and that's the end of it really. Again, at the end of the film, we see Tony Stark come into the bar where Thunderbolt Ross is, and he says, we're putting together a team. And then Thunderbolt Ross is like, who's we? So he's basically referring to him and Nick Fury, I believe, at this point, because I don't think there's many other members involved at this point. So that's The Incredible Hulk. But that's kind of like the black sheep film of the MCU because it's got different cast and like none of them really reappear except from Thunderbolt Ross, but that's not until Phase 3 in Civil War, so it doesn't really tie in very much. Then we move on to Iron Man 2, and this is a bit of a filler movie as well. Like, it does tie into the universe a bit because we get our introduction to Black Widow. But basically, what happens in this film is we see Tony Stark is getting like an infection or like disease type of thing. His arc reactor is basically killing him, and he has to keep switching like the chips he puts in it because they keep like fusing and heating and things like that. So we basically see that, and then we see him as well. He sort of, is it like, he's been a bit of an asshole in this film. Like he kind of, we see him obviously become this like better hero in the first one, and he kind of goes backwards. And I do think it was a bit filler. Like I know he's always been like that, but in this film we see him like getting drunk, and I think it is because his life's going to end. So he kind of thinks, oh, do you know what? I'm just going to do whatever I feel like doing, to like live the last few days of my life and things like that. So he's drinking and he's partying and he just goes a bit out of control. It's also a bit important because obviously in this film we see Rhodey get the War Machine armor, so he's quite a big character moving forward. So Tony obviously gets drunk and he's like being really dangerous with the Iron Man suit. So James Rhodes puts on the suit and has a fight against him, and that's when we see him get that suit and carry it on in the future. So that's quite important. And then, like I said, Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow is introduced in this movie, and we realise she's a member of Shield. Then at the very end of this film, we see Natasha's done a report on Iron Man and said he's not right for the Avengers initiative because he's like a bit volatile and things like that. So he's not going to be a good fit. So that kind of makes you think, oh, he's not going to be in it, but obviously we know he is in it anyway. But yeah, Iron Man 2, a bit of a filler, kind of a setup to the Avengers to get Black Widow in there. Right, then we move on to Thor. So the first Thor movie, just Thor. And this is basically the origin of Thor. Like he's been alive for a long time. He's always been like had these powers, but this is where we see him kind of, it's the first time he comes down to Earth, I'm guessing anyway. And this is where we see him, really start to care for Earth because obviously what happens is he is going to be crowned king, and then he's manipulated by his brother Loki, and then his father banishes him because he's basically brought war on Asgard, which is where they're from. So he gets banished to Earth, where he meets Jane Foster and Eric Selvig and Darcy, who are like scientists, and he basically falls in love with Jane. But when he's down there, his dad also sends his hammer down, but he can't like wield his hammer Mjolnir because he's basically like unworthy at this moment. So he spends time on Earth. Loki starts taking over Asgard, realizes he's not the true son of Odin, so he's not not Thor's true brother. Sorry, he's basically a frost giant, and he was abandoned. And then Odin took him because he felt a bit bad for him, but he mainly took him to create an alliance between Asgard and the frost giants. So Loki feels very used. He's been lied to his whole life, and he was never the favorite. He always felt like Thor was favoured, and I think he realises here why, because he's not the true son of Odin. So he wants to take over the throne. So he manipulates Asgard a little bit, and the Frost Giants, makes an allegiance with them, but he's actually like just what's it called, like betraying them. I almost said joking around, but it's not, it's a bit more serious than that. So he's like betrays them so that he can look really good in front of his mother and his father, and like look like he's killed the Frost Giant. Then he sends an armor down, the Destroyer, to kill Thor because he really just doesn't like Thor. But obviously this is where Thor becomes worthy. So on Earth, he lets the Destroyer hit him, and you think he's going to die, and then Mjolnir comes to him and he gets all of his strength back. And then at the end of the film, we see Loki and Thor battle it out. Loki apparently falls to his death. We all think he's died. They kind of mourning him and things like that. And then that's the end of the film, really, ready for when we pick up and see Thor and Loki as well, because he's not actually dead, in the Avengers. So then we go on to Captain America, the First Avenger. So in Captain America, the First Avenger, we've got the origin of Steve Rogers. So he starts out, he's a very scrawny and skinny little guy. He's really like, I almost said passionate is the word. The word's not passionate. It's like strong-willed. He doesn't like bullies. He's just such a heroic and nice person. Like he says, he doesn't want to kill anybody. He just wants to help his country. He never backs down. We always like get the famous line, "I could do this all day." See him getting beaten up, even though he's really skinny. he's not bothered. He'll stick up for anybody. So in this film, we see him join the army, and then Dr. Erskine, something like that. It's a bit of a hard one to pronounce. Obviously, says, I think this guy's right for the serum, because with the serum, the doctor doesn't want the most strong man or the most powerful. He wants the man with the strongest will and the one that's got a good heart and good intentions, who will really be a hero. So he chooses Steve Rogers. He goes through the procedure, and we see him like get a bit bulky. Oh, Chris Evans. And then he's like, yeah, he's basically Captain America. He's learning to use his abilities. And then at first they're just using him as a short, and he realizes, I'm sick of that. I'm not here to be a short. I'm here to actually help. And him and the Howling Commandos, well, after he gets the Howling Commandos, him, Bucky, and the Howling Commandos go and fight the Red Skull a few times, a few montages and things like that. In this film, we see Bucky Barnes, who is Captain America's best friend, fall out of a train and die, apparently, but we'll see later on that he doesn't actually die, but obviously we think he's died because he falls from a very high height. So we see that, which obviously is heartbreaking for Steve Rogers. At the end of the film, we see Captain America basically defeat the Red Skull. But in this film, it is important to note that we see our first Infinity Stone, but we didn't know it was an Infinity Stone. So basically, we see the Tesseract, which contains an Infinity Stone in the Space Stone. At the very end of the film, we see the Red Skull use the Space Stone. Well, he's not really using it, but basically it kind of looks like it absorbs him or makes him disappear. And we don't know where Red Skull goes. He just disappears, and we're like, don't have a clue where Red Skull's gone. So he's gone. He's a goner. And Captain America obviously ends up in a ship. I think he's got the Tesseract with him. And does he have the Tesseract with him? I'm sure he's got the Tesseract with him. And he has to fly the plane down into the water. He obviously gets buried in the water, and then he's frozen for 70 years. Then we move on a bit and we go like 70 years into the future, like sort of present day, and we see that some researchers, we actually see this at the very beginning of the film and then it jumps back in time. So we see some researchers have actually found him. Then we see Steve Rogers in his hospital bed in the future. He doesn't know what's going on. He wakes up, he runs out because he's like, what the fuck? Doesn't have a clue what's going on. Everything's weird. And then Nick Fury basically comes out and introduces himself and says, like, the world's changed a lot. You've been asleep for a long time. And then in the post-credit scene of this, we see, is this? Yeah, I'm sure this post-credit, at the very end, we see Captain America just doing his bits and bobs, boxing, punching a few bags, and Nick Fury comes in and basically mentions that there's going to be a threat and they need Captain America's help ready for the Avengers. I think I missed out the post-credit scene of Thor. So I think in Thor, that's the one where we actually see Loki reappear. And what we see is Eric Selvig basically like looks in a mirror, and you can sort of see like Loki's reflection, and he says we best give that a look over when they're looking at the Tesseract. So it kind of hints that Loki's going to come and get involved in the Tesseract, basically setting up the Avengers. So the last movie of Phase 1 is the big wrap up, the Avengers, the ultimate film. So, God, this is quite, I don't know, not too much happens. No, a lot happens actually, I'm lying. So in this film, we see all the Avengers get brought together. So obviously the hire Captain America to begin with. At the very beginning of the film, we see Loki travel through the Tesseract onto Earth, and he's got a scepter with him. So the scepter actually contains the Mind Gem, which is the yellow one, but again, it's contained in the scepter, so we didn't know it was the Mind Gem. So he comes, steals the Tesseract, and hypnotizes Hawkeye and Eric Selvig, so he gets them on his team. Then we see Nick Fury get Captain America, and obviously he's already got Black Widow. We see her, she's got a like really cool fight scene. She's like smashing the chair over people and bits and bobs. It's really good. So we see them too. Captain America goes and tries taking Loki out, but he's just not really like up to scratch. He's a bit, rusty and everything like that. So then what we see is Iron Man joins in, comes and helps. They capture Loki, then they've got him in a ship, and that's when we see Thor arrive. Then we have a nice little battle between Thor and Iron Man, but Captain America breaks them up. So that's how all of them get together basically. So basically we've got the whole team because we've got Natasha, Thor, Captain America and Iron Man together on the Shield helicarrier. Oh, no, I forgot the Hulk. So Natasha goes and collects Bruce Banner as well, but they don't want him to be the Hulk. They just want him to research the gamma radiation given off by the Tesseract because he is an expert in that. So we've got all of them together. So the only person we're missing really is Hawkeye, who we get at the end of the film. So basically they've got Loki, they're kind of working out what's Loki's plan here, trying to learn to be they're not really wanting to be a team, they kind of want to work individually. We see a lot of conflict, like Tony Stark isn't a massive Captain America fan, thinks he's a Boy Scout, and Captain America basically thinks Iron Man's very disrespectful and everything like that. But they all kind of realize that Shield is like using these weapons and they want to make more weapons out of them, which is just not a good idea at all. So they both kind of against Shield for that, and they all arguing and everything like that. Loki, in the meantime, wants the Hulk to come out. So Hawkeye and not Eric Selvig, but Hawkeye organises a group of Shield agents under the mind control of Loki and breaks into the Shield helicarrier, where we see the Hulk Bruce Banner turn into the Hulk. He's chasing down Natasha, and then him and Thor obviously end up having a fight, which was nice to see. And we basically see Loki come out on top. He stabs Phil Coulson, and that's really sad. And that's kind of what brings together the whole team and makes them, join in order to get revenge for what he did to Phil Coulson, basically. Nick Fury manipulates them a bit, but it gets the job done. So then at the very end, we see Eric Selvig open up a portal to space, and that's where the Chitauri, which is an army given to Loki by Thanos. So the Chitauri come down, start blowing up New York, and it's basically a battle between the Chitauri and the Avengers. At the very end, we see they're going to nuke New York City. I think it's Shield they're going to do that. So basically, Iron Man's like, we can't let that happen because it's going to kill so many people. We can sort this out. So what he does is he flies into the wormhole, the big space thing, and then basically leaves the nuke there to blow up all the Chitauri. So that's kind of like his big sacrifice, heroic moment. Then we see him fall back down, but luckily he doesn't die. That's basically the end of the film, but there's a few other things I could mention actually. So before they go back to Asgard, so obviously Thor gets the rights to Loki. It sounds like copyright, but basically he takes Loki because Loki's kind of too dangerous for Earth, and they've got better protection on Asgard, like better prisons and stuff. So he takes Loki and the Tesseract back to Asgard. So we see that, and then the rest of them kind of go their own separate ways. And that's it really. I don't think there's anything more to the Avengers. That's basically what happens. So Tesseract goes up to space, Asgard, so that's where that is, and the scepter that Loki had stays on Earth with Shield. So that's basically all that happens. In the post-credit scene, though, very important, we see Thanos and his little minion person, I think he's called the Other, basically says to Thanos, to challenge them, meaning the Avengers, would be to court death. And we just see Thanos turn around and give a little smile. So it's kind of hinting at death because in the comics, obviously, Thanos is in love with the character of Death. But we don't really see that in the films. But yeah, that's basically the end credit scene for the Avengers. So that was set up for way down the line in the future. But that's going to wrap up phase 1. So let's move into phase 2. Right, so to kick off phase 2, we had Iron Man 3, and this is basically just like to wrap up the trilogy. Obviously, it takes place after the Avengers, but we don't see any of the Avengers. It's all about Tony Stark, and it is a story about Tony Stark more so than Iron Man as well, I'd say. So basically, what we see in this film is, we see there's a terrorist called the Mandarin, and he's blown up things and bits and bobs like that. So Tony Stark basically threatens him and says, "Come to my house, come and fight me," type thing. His house ends up getting bombed, and we think Tony Stark dies. Well, Pepper Potts and everybody like that thinks he's died. He hasn't actually died. Obviously, he survived, and he goes into this little shed with this little boy and like to recover his armor and like try and build it up a bit and research, like discover what's actually going on, because there's also these people and they like burn up really bad and they like explode and things like that. So you're a bit like, whoa, what's going on here? There's like two stories, and that's called like Extremis, and that's run by Aldrich Killian. But then we find out that the Mandarin's not really the Mandarin. He's basically an actor called Trevor Slattery, and he's been hired by Aldrich Killian to cause these like explosions so that there's like a terrorist that the media are focusing on, so he can work behind the scenes and take over and get loads of power without being noticed, type of thing. So he's the real Mandarin because he set up all the deaths and everything like that. So we see like Tony get captured, and then basically Pepper gets injected with this extremis stuff, which can either kill you or make you like quite powerful and like have like weird fire powers and shit like that. So that's basically all that happens really. Like the Mandarin's not the real Mandarin. In the end, Tony, we see all of his armors. He's literally got like 50 armors. They all come in, and then like he destroys them all at the end because he wants to be with Pepper and she doesn't like all the armors. Because he's kind of got is it PTSD? Yeah, he's got PTSD from being in the wormhole from the Avengers. So he's like kind of recovering from that. So he always feels like he needs to be in the suit, and he feels like he is the suit rather than just being Tony Stark. So he blows up all the suits to show Pepper, nah, I've kind of realized I am Tony Stark. I'm not like Tony Stark and Iron Man are the same person, but not all the time, basically. They can be separate as well. So he blows all them up. They get treatment for Pepper because she's been injected with the extremis, and they sort her out, and then he gets his arc reactor taken out, basically. So he's kind of like a normal guy, doesn't have that big glowy thing in his chest. That's basically it for Iron Man 3. So we'll go straight on to Thor the Dark World. So in Thor the Dark World, it's basically another filler movie, but we do get an Infinity Stone, so it's kind of important. So we get a brief history of a race called the Dark Elves that have fought Asgard years and years ago, and they used to manipulate like the ether because it was very powerful and stuff, and they could take control and plunge all the 9 realms into darkness if they had it and all of that. So we see that, then we jump to Earth and we see Jane Foster, who's having a bit of like a shit one because Thor left her 2 years ago. He still hasn't come back, and she's still kind of grieving, being like, oh, he's left me, type of thing, that stuff. So we see her and Darcy, and they basically discover like some floating truck. These kids show them a floating truck, and then Jane ends up discovering the ether, which is actually on Earth in this like monolith thing. And that basically takes her over, and then Heimdall, who can usually see everything, loses sight of her, kind of meaning she's in a place between death and life. So Thor obviously goes down to Earth and takes Jane back to Asgard to discover what's going on with her. Obviously the thing like rejects people touching it, so she's kind of like blown a few people up and shit. Well, she's not blown people up, but like forcing them back away from her. But it's basically going to end up killing her because it's too powerful. It's making her ill. So we see Jane and Thor on Asgard. They're trying to discover like how should we get the ether out of her. But in the meantime, the Dark Elves have woken up because like anybody getting in contact with the ether kind of wakes them up. So they're like breaking into Asgard around the same sort of time. We see Loki in prison. He's just like chilling, having a bit of fun. He's not though. Like he's just in there reading and shit. And then so that all that happens. Then there's a big fight with like the Dark Elves, and one of them gets in order to get basically Jane Foster and stuff like that. And Frigga, Thor and Loki's mother, ends up being killed, which is really sad. And then we've got a nice funeral for her. Obviously, Loki at this point is really fucked off because he actually feels like that's his mum. He doesn't really like Odin as his dad, but he feels like Frigga was his mum, so he's angry at this point. So Thor thinks, right, we need to go and fight these dark elves, but we need to get this out of Jane. So why not let Jane absorb it? Then we can get it out of him and just destroy him, basically, and it with him. So they make this plan. He actually teams up with Loki because he knows that he would want revenge for his mother. They go to another place, I don't know what the name is, to fight the dark elves, basically. And when they're there, what happens is Loki pretends, well, not just Loki and Thor both team up and like choose to trick the dark elves and like pretend to cut Thor's arm off and everything like that. But obviously it's just a trick. Then they end up battling with the dark elves. Malekith gets the ether inside of him, so Jane's like a bit better now. She's basically healed, but she's weak. And then Curse, who is one of the dark elves, basically gets killed, but he kills Loki at the same time. So we think Loki is just always coming back. So that happens. Thor's a bit grieving, because he's like, oh, my brother's actually dead this time. Still not dead. And then he goes back to Earth with Jane, and they're gonna try and like they know Malekith's gonna come there, so they kind of wait it out for him, build some like technology to like help them out in the battle in Greenwich, I think it is. So they're in Greenwich, and basically Thor and the Dark Elf Malekith basically end up battling. Thor wins in the end, and then in the post-credit scene we see Sif, Lady Sif, and Volstagg from the Warriors 3 take the ether contained in like an Asgardian containment box thing to the Collector. So Benicio del Toro's Collector, who we also see in Guardians of the Galaxy a bit later on, we see them take it to him. When they give it to him, he asks why bring it here, sort of thing. And Volstagg suggests like we've already got the Tesseract on Asgard. It wouldn't be so wise to keep two Infinity Stones so close together. So that's our first hint that like the Tesseract actually got an Infinity Stone inside, and then the ether is obviously an Infinity Stone, but it's in like liquid form type of thing. And then they leave, and the Collector's like 1 down, 5 to go. So you kind of think, oh, he's after the Infinity Stones. Is he going to be a villain in the future? Then we move on to post credit scene. Is there anything? No, that's it. And then him and Jen. That's a shit one. So move on, and we've got Captain America: The Winter Soldier. So this is a very grounded film, but it is very important because what we learn in this film is Hydra has basically been a part of S.H.I.E.L.D. all throughout S.H.I.E.L.D.'s existence. So we don't really know who to trust in this film, where we pick up and Steve is kind of struggling to settle in. He's working with S.H.I.E.L.D., but he's kind of struggling to settle in because there's a lot of secrets and lies, and like they call it like protection, but it's not really protection. He sees it like it's not freedom, so it's not protection. Like people should be able to choose and things like that. And Natasha goes on a few missions when they're together, and she's doing secret things, and he doesn't like that. So he's trying to fit into this new world, but he's struggling a bit. And then we see Nick Fury obviously gets shot because he's found something out that he's not meant to know. So we think Nick Fury, he obviously dies. We see him die and everything like that. Captain America doesn't know who to trust. But then he begins to trust Natasha, and they go, and that's when they discover Hydra is like infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. years and years ago, like basically when S.H.I.E.L.D. began. And we get introduced to the Winter Soldier, who's got a metal arm. He's quick. He's basically enhanced, exactly like Captain America. He's a really strong guy. Then when we get like a nice battle between, nice, not really nice, but like it's a good battle. It's an exciting battle between Captain America and Natasha. They join up with the Falcon. So all three of them are basically battling the Winter Soldier and his henchmen. And what we discover is the Winter Soldier is actually Bucky Barnes, Captain America's best friend that died in the 1940s. So he's also been taken in by Hydra, manipulated, brainwashed, given his metal arm, and then they basically put him on cryostasis and just used him for missions whenever they needed him. So that's when we discover Bucky Barnes is also still alive, and Captain America, that gets to him so hard. He is like, when it happens, he's gobsmacked, doesn't know what to do because it's his best friend, and he realizes he's alive and now he's evil. It's just an absolute heartbreak to him. So they get captured by Hydra essentially, but luckily they escape, so they don't get killed. And then they discover Nick Fury is actually alive. At the end, they go to the helicarriers, which are meant to wipe out millions of people, but they reprogram them just to wipe out each other. So the helicarriers are going to get wiped out, so they don't exist anymore. that happens. Captain America almost dies, and at the very end we see Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier, dragging him out of the lake. So basically saving him. So you get the hint that like Bucky Barnes is bad because he's been manipulated, but he still knows he cares for Steve in some way. He doesn't know why, but you can tell he does care for Steve in some way. So then in the end credit scene, we get in this film we get an introduction as well to Agent 13, who I'll talk about her a bit more, but she's kind of like a potential love interest for Steve Rogers. She's basically his neighbor in this, but she's just a nice agent, and she sticks up for what she believes in and things like that. So then we move into post credit scene. So the first one we see Bucky Barnes in a museum learning about Captain. I don't know what's going on with me. I've got the hiccups. Learning about Captain America and himself and the Howling Commando. So reading up about himself a bit, and then I don't know what's going on with me. Honestly, I think it's because I've been drinking because I'm talking that much. Sorry. Yeah. So we have that, and then the final proper. You've got a mid credit scene, then an end credit scene. So for the end one, we see what's his name, Baron von Strucker with the scepter. So he's a Hydra guy in his secret basement looking place, and he's talking about the Age of Miracles, and we see he's got the scepter and he's using it. And then we basically end up talking about the twins, and then we get a quick visual of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, so Wanda and Pietro Maximoff. So we quickly see them, who are going to come into Age of Ultron a bit later on. So yeah, that's basically what happens in the Winter Soldier. Then we go into Guardians of the Galaxy, and this was our first, space cosmic type of thing, and we see a bit more of Thanos in this. So what happens in this is Peter Quill gets another Infinity Stone. We didn't know it was an Infinity Stone until a bit later on in the movie. It's basically a device called the Orb. Inside the Orb, there is the purple Infinity Stone, which is actually the Power Stone. He gets that from a planet called Morag, and he's being chased down by what's his name, Korath, who works for Ronan the Accuser, because Ronan the Accuser wants the stone, but he needs the stone to give it to Thanos, because he's actually working for Thanos. So Peter Quill gets that, and then they send Gamora, because Gamora's working for Thanos, but underneath Ronan. So Thanos has basically hired Nebula and Gamora, who are sisters, out to Ronan so he can use them to get the stone. So Gamora goes to get the stone from Peter Quill. So Peter Quill's trying to sell it. Nobody's having it because he doesn't want to buy it from him because Ronan's after it, and Ronan's a Kree fanatic, and he's scared that he's going to get killed by Ronan. So Peter Quill's stuck with the orb, and then Gamora basically tries taking it off him, and there's a battle scene. So he's battling it out. At the same time, what's his name? Rocket Raccoon and Groot see that Peter Quill has a bounty on his head, and they're all about making money. So they're trying to capture Peter Quill at the same time. Gamora's trying to get the orb, but then she ends up fighting them two because she's trying to battle him. So they all end up battling each other basically. And then the Nova Corps basically capture them and put them in prison. So then we see them all escape the prison, and this is where they meet in the prison. That's where they meet Drax the Destroyer, because he's going to kill Gamora. They stop him from killing Gamora and say, it's Ronan the Accuser that basically killed your family. I want to kill him too, so let's just team up. They basically all team up to escape. They're going to sell it to the buyer that Gamora's got, who is the Collector, and then split the profit, except Drax, he doesn't want any of the profit. He just wants to kill Ronan. So that's what we see. They escape, they go to the Collector, and this is where the Collector gives us the origin of all of the Infinity Stones, and breaks all that down. Basically says, before the universe itself, there was concentrated, it exploded, and then they got put into concentrated ingots, which are the Infinity Stones, and they all wield immense power, destroying, very destructive. Can't be held by ordinary beings. It has to be people with extraordinary power. So we see that, and then Drax calls Ronan. He has a bit of a battle, gets his ass kicked, and then Is it Nebula? Yeah, Nebula's basically on the chase for Gamora during this scene as well, almost kills her and manages to get the Power Stone. So now Ronan's in possession of the Power Stone, and we see Peter Quill and Gamora get like abducted by the Ravagers, who are led by Yondu, and they are the people who basically brought up Peter Quill when he was younger, but then he kind of like betrayed them, so they don't really get along loads. But they decide to team up, as well as Drax, Rocket, and Groot, to fight against Ronan the Accuser, because he's going to end up destroying everything with this power. In the meantime, Ronan's meant to give the stone to Thanos, but he gets a bit too big for his boots and decides, nah, I'm going to take it for myself, puts it into his hammer, and then he's like he's going to destroy Xandar, because his like motivation was to destroy Xandar. And Thanos said, "You bring me the stone, I'll destroy it, no problem." But when Ronan gets the stone, he's like, "Well, I'm powerful to do it myself, so I'll just do it myself." So he basically like tries betraying Thanos, and that's what happens basically. And then he's wielding all this power, getting ready to destroy Xandar, where the Nova Corps live. So the Nova Corps team up with the Guardians and the Ravagers, and they all have a big battle against Ronan. At the end, we see like the big battle. Then Peter Quill does a bit of distraction, pulls out a few moves, gets a bit of a groove on, and tries having a dance off with Ronan, but it's just to distract Ronan so that Rocket can shoot him, and then the stone comes out with his hammer, and we see Peter Quill holding the stone for quite a while, and you're like, oh, I thought this would just kill him. But then all the Guardians start holding hands, and they're like sharing the power, and then they manage to destroy Ronan and then get it back in the orb. So that's kind of the first hint that Peter Quill's maybe not just a human, he's maybe something else, because to this point we just believed he was a human. So we see all of that, and then obviously Yondu and the Ravagers want it, and Peter Quill gives it to them, but he's tricked them, hasn't actually given them the orb, because it's too powerful. And then at the end of the movie, we see the orb and the power stone inside of it go to the Nova Corps for safekeeping, basically. And then the Guardians are a team, and they shoot off and kind of decide what do we do. And then in the post credit scene, we basically see the Collector. His thing is being destroyed because one of the girls tries grabbing the Infinity Stone, and it basically explodes everything in his collection. So that's a bit shit for him, really. We see Howard the Duck makes a nice little cameo in that one, so that was nice. Is there anything else post-credit scene for Guardians? I think it's just Howard the Duck. Oh, then we get a little. So Groot obviously dies in this film. I can't believe I forgot to mention that. But Rocket replants him. So basically, it's a different Groot, but if you replant one of his sticks or whatever they are, roots, whatever, he can regrow, but it will be a different Groot. So we see Groot start to regrow, and he's having a bit of a dance and stuff at the end. We see that as well. Then we move into Avengers: Age of Ultron. So in this one, we see the Avengers meet the twins, so Wanda and Pietro Maximoff, and they are evil. They're working for Baron von Strucker in Sokovia at this point. Well, they're from Sokovia, should I say. And then we see they've basically gained their abilities from the Mind Stone, which was inside the scepter. Tony Stark and the Avengers manage to infiltrate the base and get the scepter, which they then take back to Thor's going to take it back to Asgard, but before he does, they're going to celebrate for a few days. And he said they can look at it and see if it's got any potential, or just run a few tests, him and Bruce Banner. So they begin running tests, and Tony thinks, oh, this can be an AI. We can create a suit of armors to protect the world that is an AI, basically. As we all know, it turns evil and becomes Ultron. It kills Jarvis, which is Tony's current AI, and it gets itself into a robot body and starts fighting the Avengers. It's in all of the internet files, so it's got access to nuke codes. It's got access to pretty much everything. And then Ultron goes on to get the twins, who hate Tony Stark because his weapons killed their parents and basically made their life hell. So Ultron goes and gets them because he knows they'll work for him. There's a few battles between them all, and we see a few of the Avengers' worst fears because Scarlet Witch manipulates them. So Tony's worst fear is seeing all the other Avengers die. what is it, Bruce Banner, we don't really see his. Natasha's just like her back in the Red Room, so we get a bit of past to see her being a ballerina, going in for an experiment, which she later reveals is like what's it called? She can't have kids, so like sterilization, that's it. And then we don't see anything from Hawkeye because he avoids it. Captain America, his dream is like dancing with Peggy, and she's like come home and stuff like that. And then Thor basically sees Heimdall and his eyes are white instead of orange, and he's like, why are your eyes like this? And he's like, oh, I see everything. I see you leading us to hell, setting up Thor Ragnarok, which we see a bit later on. So it's basically like all the Asgardians are dead, and Thor's like, oh my god, what's going on? So then Thor goes away for a bit to find out about the Infinity Stones, and in this time, Tony manages to get the scepter again off Ultron. So him and Bruce Banner decide, well, basically, Ultron starts building an ultimate form, an ultimate body. So Tony Stark and Bruce Banner think we'll take the body and try and like program it so it's good, because then it can combat Ultron because it's meant to be the ultimate form. But then obviously Hawkeye and like, well, not Hawkeye, Captain America and the twins kind of team up, and they're like, nah, he's gonna make something even worse. So the twins kind of turn towards good because they see that Ultron's gonna destroy loads and he's a bit of a maniac. So there's a bit of a battle between like Iron Man and Captain America and stuff like that at this point. And then we see Thor come back from wherever he's been. He's been for a bath to find out about the Infinity Stones for some reason. He comes back and like strikes lightning down into it, and basically the Vision is born with the Mind Stone in his head. So he's very powerful, but we know we can trust him because we see him wield Mjolnir, which is Thor's hammer. So he wields Mjolnir, and then he's worthy. We trust him. They go and fight Ultron. He basically lifts up half of Sokovia and then drops it. So basically everybody in Sokovia is going to die, and probably other parts of the world. It's going to be catastrophic. They manage to get around this, but in the process, when they're fighting, Quicksilver gets killed. So that's pretty sad. Yeah, that's not good. Then we see Vision get rid of Ultron, but you never know if Ultron is truly dead because, I mean, like an AI is kind of in the internet, so his body might have died, but is he really dead? That's the question. So apparently Vision kills Ultron, but you never really know. Have to wait and see, he could appear in the future. So that's what happens basically there. We see War Machine gets a bit of action and things like that. Yeah, and then at the end of the film, we see basically a new Avengers team. Like in the film, we get introduced to Hawkeye's family, and he decides like he's going to retire and just spend time with his family and everything like that. So we see him go off there. Tony Stark has the same idea. He's like, I want to, be with Pepper, maybe build a family, build a farm. So he kind of goes off as well. And then Bruce, this is another important thing. Bruce at the end, he knows he's too dangerous in the Hulk, and he really cares for Natasha because they've got like a bit of a relationship thing going on. So rather than staying on Earth because he knows he's dangerous as the Hulk, he kind of just lets the Quinjet go wherever it's going to shoot off to. So you don't know where Hulk ends up, but we find that out later. So that's where they've gone. Thor goes back to learn more about the Infinity Stones because he knows they're very powerful. So he goes to learn about that back to Asgard and other places, the 9 realms. So we're left with Captain America, Steve Rogers, and Natasha Romanoff, Black Widow. So them two basically put together a new team, and they're, going to be a new Avengers team. So on the team, we've got War Machine, Falcon, Scarlet Witch, Captain America, and Black Widow. So that's who we see. Did I mention Falcon? I think I mentioned Falcon. So that's who we get at the end of that. So that's what we see there. Then in the end credit scene, we see Thanos pick up an Infinity Gauntlet and say, fine, I'll do it myself, hinting at the famous Infinity Gauntlet and like the Infinity Stones and everything like that. So that was like, whoa, my God, he's the big bad. Then we move on to a smaller movie, which is Ant-Man. So in Ant-Man, we're introduced to Scott Lang, who is in prison, and originally Hank Pym is the Ant-Man from the comics, but then it gets passed down to Scott Lang. That's quite a lot later on. But in this film, Scott Lang is the Ant-Man straight away. Hank Pym used to be the Ant-Man, but that was years and years ago. So what we see is Scott Lang, he's basically committed a crime in the past, burgled some people and stuff, got some money, but what he was doing, it's illegal, but it was kind of good because it was a like big company conning people for money type of thing. So he's actually a good guy. Anyway, he gets out of prison and he really wants to go and see his daughter, but the mum doesn't really want him to see Cassie, his daughter, because he doesn't have a job and he doesn't have income. He's been in prison, so she says, if you get a stable job, stable place, then you can start seeing her, like visitation and stuff. So he gets a job, but then they find out about his past and they decide to fire him. So then he takes on a job that his friend Luis has been talking about. The job has actually been set up by Hank Pym, because Hank Pym has this guy in mind to become the new Ant-Man. Because in Hank Pym has oh my god, what's his industry called? Basically, he's got a like industry, and it's like it was his company, not industry, company. And Darren Cross has taken over his company. So Darren Cross is trying to work on his own Ant-Man formula, but it's basically killing people, and he's going to weaponize it, and it's just going to be really dangerous. So Hank Pym needs somebody to fight against that, but him being Ant-Man in the past, he can't wear the suit again because it's taken his toll on him, and he's a lot older now. So his daughter, Hope Van Dyne, is like, let me be this like Ant-Man, I'm trained for it and everything like that. And he's like, no way, you're not doing it. So Hope Van Dyne works with Darren Cross, who is actually the villain of the movie, and she pretends that she hates her dad. She does kind of hate her dad because basically the mum died years and years ago, and he always lied about why she died, and he was never there for her. He was always grieving and just sent her away, but she was obviously grieving, so she wanted him to be there for her, and he wasn't. So they don't get along loads, but he admits the reason he doesn't want her to be Ant-Man or the Wasp, and why he lied about it is because he feels like it's his fault. Basically, her mom, was the Wasp in the past, and she sacrificed herself to save loads of people, and that's why she's died. She went into the quantum realm, which you can't escape from. Anyway, so we see Scott Lang become the Ant-Man, do some training, and then he goes to fight Darren Cross. And then at the very end of the movie, they're having a battle, and he has to shrink between the particles, which is like he has to shrink to a subatomic size, which is basically entering the quantum realm, which is where Janet Van Dyne, Hank Pym's ex-wife, the previous Wasp, and Hope Van Dyne's mum went in the past. But you can't actually come out when you get in there. Scott Lang decides to sacrifice himself because he needs to save his daughter. So he does it, goes into the quantum realm. But when he comes back, like he actually manages to come back. So Hank Pym and Hope Van Dyne, not Janet, are both like, it is possible to get back from the quantum realm. So they're like very excited because then Hank Pym starts thinking there's a way that Janet could get back. So yeah, and the quantum realm is like a universe of its own. So it's a good introduction to that. But as a whole, Ant-Man is like a much more grounded movie than the rest of the films. So at the very end of it, what we see is in the post-credit scene is Hank Pym basically takes I keep calling her Janet, Hope down into like the basement or wherever it is, and he basically shows her a wasp costume and says, like, it's yours now, and she's like, about time. So setting up that in the next film she is probably going to be the Wasp, so it'll be Ant-Man and the Wasp because Hope and Ant-Man are like kind of together as well. So yeah, it's a much smaller scale movie, but it's still a great film. And that wraps up the end of phase 2. So next we'll move into phase 3, which is the big one. So let's move into the big one, phase 3. So this has quite a lot of movies, so I'll try and keep it as short as I possibly can so that it doesn't drag out for ages. Right, so kicking off phase 3, we have Captain America Civil War, and this is obviously quite an important film in the franchise because we see the splitting up of Captain America and Iron Man. So basically what happens in this film is Captain America and his new group of team, new team of Avengers, sorry, go to try and confiscate a mass weapon from Crossbones, who we were introduced to in The Winter Soldier. And when they're doing this, he mentions Bucky still being alive and Bucky remembering who Steve was. And obviously, Steve hasn't seen him since The Winter Soldier, so it kind of triggers Steve a bit and he doesn't know how to react. Then Crossbones blows himself up, but Wanda obviously tries containing the blast and shoots him up into the sky, but it ends up destroying a building and blowing up loads of people in Lagos, it's called, or Lagos or something like that. And it causes, a lot of deaths and people aren't happy with it. So then General Thunderbolt Ross, again from The Incredible Hulk, comes in and he brings attention to the Sokovia Accords, which is where all like loads of different nations have agreed that superheroes can be a thing, but they have to operate under the supervision of the government. So the government choose which issues they can go and deal with and things like that. So they're not free anymore to just do what they want. They have to act under the government, and if they don't, then they're kind of like a fugitive from the justice system, and they'll be arrested basically. So Iron Man, after speaking to a lady whose son has passed away in Sokovia in the events of the Age of Ultron, is really upset about it because he basically caused Ultron, and he caused that massive event, so he feels guilty for that. So Iron Man is basically on the side of the Sokovia Accords, so is James Rhodes, War Machine, and then you've got Vision, so Paul Bettany's character, he's on their side as well. And then on the other side, you've got like Captain America, who doesn't want to give up his freedom, and like he's always been against the government. And after seeing what happened to Shield in The Winter Soldier, he kind of like he's really anxious about that type of stuff. So he decides, nah, that's it, I'm gonna fight for what I believe in. So he does that. He's on the opposite side, and he's got Sam Wilson, the Falcon, obviously agrees with him. So does Wanda, because they're trying to like stop Wanda from going out and using her powers and things like that. It's not really fair. She's not really free. And then Natasha, so Black Widow, you would think she'd be on Captain America's side, but she's actually on the side of Iron Man. And then we get introduced to Black Panther in this film, so that's why it's a great film as well. Get introduced to Black Panther, and he's on Iron Man's side because his dad is basically killed. He's not really on a side, I wouldn't say, but he's basically fighting to kill Bucky because he thinks Bucky Barnes has killed his dad, but it wasn't actually Bucky Barnes, it was Baron Zemo. So we see that all happening, and they battling it out basically. They get a few more team members in, so Captain America gets Hawkeye, he like comes out of retirement to help Captain America, and Scott Lang, so Ant-Man, who turns into Giant Man in this movie. Then on Tony's side, he obviously gets Black Panther as well, and Spider-Man. This is our introduction to Spider-Man as well. So it's quite a big film because it introduces us to two new characters who would go on to have their own solo movies, and yeah, it's just a lot of stuff going on. So we see them battle it out. In the end, Captain America and Bucky Barnes go to Sokovia. No, not Sokovia. Go to, I think it's like Moscow or somewhere in Russia, to stop Baron Zemo, who's the villain of the film, and he reveals a tape showing that Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier, actually killed Tony Stark's parents. And that really angers Tony, especially when he sees him choking the mum out. He's not happy with that. So Tony Stark starts fighting Captain America, well, mainly Bucky Barnes, but Captain America as well, who's trying to protect Bucky Barnes, and there's a massive fight between them. None of them get killed, but at the end of the fight, Tony Stark says to Captain America, "You don't deserve that shield, my father built it," and Captain America drops it and leaves the shield. So that's kind of him putting down the mantle of Captain America and saying, okay, I'm not Captain America anymore. So that's basically what happens in Civil War. Then moving on, later on in that year, we had Doctor Strange. So that doesn't really tie into any other films. It's kind of isolated. And in Doctor Strange, this is obviously quite a big film as well because it introduces us to the whole magical aspect of the universe. Like Thor did introduce it slightly, but they kind of say it's a bit of science as well as just magic. This is just purely magic. So in this film, it's basically an origin story. We're introduced to Dr. Stephen Strange, who's like a surgeon. He's really good. He's definitely the best surgeon. He's obviously a bit of a dick. He's driving too quick and he's on his phone, don't text when you're on your phone. Don't text when you're on your phone. That honestly, right, okay. Let me start that again. Don't text whilst you're driving. That's what I meant. Um, yeah, so he's obviously texting whilst he's driving and he's speeding as well and he crashes. All of his hands get fucked and he can't be a surgeon anymore. So he spends pretty much all of his wealth on trying to find a cure and he can't find a cure anywhere. So then he goes to the ancient one in Tibet and he's like, how can you help me? And she's like, oh, through the mystic arts. And he's like, nah, this is bullshit. And then she shows him that it's real and all the magic. So it's basically a story of him developing his powers. You see him doing a bit of training, and he's clearly cut out for being a magician because, like, magician, master of the mystical arts. Magician just sounds like comedic, so I don't know what to call him. Sorcerer, I'll say that sorcerer because he opens the Eye of Agamotto, and that actually God, I can't speak, contains the time stone, which is another of the infinity stones, basically. So that one's green and it's the time stone and it's held in the Eye of Agamotto, which is a necklace that Doctor Strange usually wears. So he gets control of that, so it shows he's like destined to be this sorcerer supreme and stuff and take over from the ancient one. So we are introduced to that, which is exciting. And then obviously there's a lot of battling, and we're introduced to Dormammu, who's like a villain, but he lives in like a different universe type of thing, like a different multiverse. So that's interesting in like introducing all them concepts and like them big bads from like other worlds and stuff. So I mean, all of that's really interesting. So we get that, and then at the end of the film, we see him put the Eye of Agamotto away because he doesn't fully know what Infinity Stones are, so he's not really ready for the power of like it all the time. And then at the very end, like post-credit scene, we see Thor visiting Doctor Strange, but we don't go back to that until later in Thor Ragnarok. So that's Doctor Strange. Then in 2017, the first film we had was Guardians of the Galaxy 2. So this one doesn't like do loads for the universe as a whole, but it's quite a nice story. Again, it focuses on Peter Quill, I'd say, the most. He's like the main character. And it's about him meeting his dad, basically. So at the end of the first Guardians, we kind of realised he's not just a human because he held the Power Stone for so long. So in this film, we find out why he was able to do that. So we're introduced to his dad, who is Ego, played by Kurt Russell, and he's basically a celestial, which is very powerful. He's basically a god, but even more powerful. He's just very powerful. He's basically a planet, but he's put himself into human form. And he's actually evil, and he's got this plan to like take over the world. But he doesn't have enough power, and he needs his child to have like a little bit of his power to help boost his own power. And Peter Quill's the only one of his kids who's got that power. And we find out he's actually killed all of his other kids because they didn't have the power. So he's a bit of a shit dad, not gonna lie. But in the film, we also like get some nice story development because the Guardians are split up. So we get Rocket and Groot; they're separate from Drax, Gamora, and Peter, and they team up with Yondu. And there's some really nice stories there. I mean, there is a death. I don't really want to spoil it, but it's Yondu. I'm gonna spoil it anyway because I don't know. I just want to do it. Yeah, so Yondu dies and it's really sad, but I didn't want to see him die, but I think it's a really great like character arc he gets in this film, so I thought that was nice. And that's basically all that happens in Guardians 2. It's not too much tied into the universe. It's just like kind of separate. And it does take place back like a month after the first Guardians, even though it came out in 2017, it's meant to take place in like 2014. So, you know, it's a bit back in time, so it's not as like effective either. Well, it is, but it's like not with the current events of where we've got to in the MCU at this point. So that's Guardians 2. And then we have Spider-Man Homecoming. So this is the first like solo movie of Spider-Man in the MCU, played by Tom Holland. And yeah, so this is a really good film. It introduces us to Peter Parker. We don't get the origin story because I think most people know the Peter Parker Spider-Man origin story. So he's already Spider-Man as we've seen him in Civil War. It takes place like a few weeks after Civil War, and it's basically Peter Parker wanting to be an Avenger, and he's like waiting for the next mission, like fighting against Captain America, because obviously that was like a big event, that was like an Avenger event. But basically he's just been a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and he doesn't really have much to do. He's like stopping thieves from getting bicycles and like like tiny little things like that. So nothing really big, no Avenger level threats, but he wants to be an Avenger. And so he's always talking to Happy Hogan because he's his point of contact for Tony Stark. But he's just not hearing from Tony Stark, and it's winding him up because he wants to do something bigger. So at the same time, the cleanup from the original Avengers back in 2012, there was a company that cleaned up all the tech and everything like that, ran by Michael Keaton's Adrian Toomes character, and they got told they weren't allowed to do it anymore, which really frustrated him because that was his whole job. He had loads of men, and that was their job. That's how they made their money. They had contracts. They paid for vans. They paid for equipment to salvage it all, and it got shut down. And basically, Tony Stark was the guy who kind of took it over. So they got pissed off because they were like, "Well, he's caused this, and now he's getting paid." To clean it up, and they're going to get the credit for cleaning it up. So that annoyed them. So him and his gang kind of made a high-tech suit, Vulture suit. So he's the villain in this, the Vulture basically, and he's after Tony Stark's tech. They're after getting more money for their business and stuff. And at the same time, Happy Hogan is preparing all of Tony Stark's stuff to move from Stark Tower slash the Avengers Tower, and they're moving upstate instead. So all of that important tech and really powerful, dangerous stuff that Tony Stark is moving, Adrian Toomes is gonna ultimately try and get that for himself and use the tech for weapons. So they've been manufacturing weapons and selling them and stuff like that. So like, oh my god, I said Spider-Man because I was mixing Peter Parker and Spider-Man. So Peter Parker or Spider-Man, basically he's trying to track them down and stop that, and it gets kind of big, and like obviously there's the ferry scene, and the ferry gets cut in half, and he's trying to save it and stuff, and you've got Iron Man a bit on his back saying like, just stay low, we'll take care of the bigger things, don't get involved. And he gets involved, and then ultimately Iron Man ends up taking his suit off him, the one that he designed, Tony Stark had designed, because he thought, you need to learn to use your abilities, not rely on the suit, and not getting involved in things that you can't deal with. So it's a nice arc for Peter Parker, because then we see him go back to his old suit, which isn't as good, but he still wants to fight to do good and protect his neighborhood and everything like that. So it's good character arc because it shows Peter Parker himself is Spider-Man. It's not the suit that makes him, it is his personality and everything like that. So that's basically what happens in Homecoming. It's nothing major because it doesn't like tie in massively to the other films, just like Iron Man's in it, but it doesn't really affect any future events or anything like that really, except Tony Stark and Peter Parker's relationship, I would say. God, I missed that joke in there. So after that, we then have Thor Ragnarok, which is like one of my favorites. It's so funny. I love Taika Waititi. I love Chris Hemsworth. Oh my god, he's so good looking. It's just such a good film. God, where to start? So basically, what happens in this is we see Thor, and he starts out and he's with Surtur in what's it called? 1 second. Oh no, is it Musselheim? Musselheim? Shit, is it Musselheim? I think it's Musselheim or no, it's probably not, right? So I can't pronounce all the realms and I don't know them all. I thought it was Musselheim. That's probably not even one of them, to be honest. He's basically in the realm where Surtur is, who's this big fire demon who's meant to cause Ragnarok. And Ragnarok is basically the cycle of death and rebirth for the Asgardians. That's basically what it is. So we pick up there, and then Thor goes straight back to Asgard, and he's like, "What's going on? The nine realms are in chaos." He goes there, he sees Odin, he's like in his robe, eating grapes, watching a play about Loki dying. So he's like, "What's going on here?" So basically, Loki didn't die in Thor: The Dark World, and he's been pretending to be Odin and ruling Asgard, but letting everything else go to shit. So Thor's a bit like, "What's the crack? Let's go back to Earth, find Dad." So, because Loki banished him to Earth. So they go back to Earth, and this is where we see Doctor Strange, who helps them find Odin. So they go and find Odin, but Odin's kind of ready to die, and he says, Frigga, their mum is calling him. So they go and see him, and then in Norway, they go and see him. That's where he is. And he's just like, chilling out on the cliff sides, cruising. And then basically he says, I'm gonna die, but just before I do, just drop a bit of knowledge on you. You're not actually the firstborn, Thor. You're not my only son. Well, yeah, you are my only son, but not my only child. That's what I meant because Hela's obviously a lass. So basically, his firstborn is Hela, who has been locked in hell because she just wanted to kill everyone because she's the goddess of death. And Odin used to be a bad guy and like he just bullshitted everyone about it basically. So Odin dies, and he's like, yeah, you can fight your sister now. You're welcome. So he's a bit of a shit dad as well. What is it with shit dads? I don't know. So yeah, so basically Hela comes out, and you get Hela, and she is really powerful and destroys Mjolnir because it used to be hers, and she's just really powerful, so she just breaks it. Then basically they're having a fight, and Thor gets thrown out of the Bifrost, which is like the rainbow bridge that teleports them to and from Asgard, and Loki's already been kicked out somewhere, so you don't know where Loki is. Anyway, Thor ends up on a planet called Sakaar, and he gets tagged by Valkyrie, who is actually an Asgardian, and basically he gets turned into like a warrior, so he has to fight in this arena against the champion. Loki has also landed on the same planet of Sakaar and made friends with the ruler of the planet, the Grandmaster. So that's Jeff Goldblum. Oh God, what a lad. So them two are quite friendly, and he doesn't get turned into warrior. He's kind of like the henchman of like the Grandmaster and stuff. But Thor has to go and battle the champion, and he thinks he's going to win. When we get introduced to the champion, it's actually the Hulk. So he's been like gone since Avengers: Age of Ultron, but this is where he's been. But he is in the Hulk form, and he's basically been in that form for 2 years. So what we see is Thor makes a plan to go back to Asgard and get rid of Hela because she's obviously causing loads of chaos and everything like that. So he plans to team up with the Hulk and Valkyrie to escape, but Valkyrie's not really having any of it. But then she kind of comes to her senses and realizes, yeah, Hela's a bitch. We definitely need to kill her. So that kind of stuff happens, and then Hulk turns back into Bruce Banner. How does he? Oh yeah, so the inner Quinjet and Thor. Well, no, Hulk puts on like no, is it Thor? Thor accidentally puts on a video of Natasha Romanoff talking to the Hulk, and it kind of reminds him, and obviously it calms him down because from Age of Ultron, Natasha used to be the way to calm the Hulk down. So he turns back into Bruce Banner, and then you think he's going to stay as Bruce Banner for the rest of the film, but he doesn't. So what happens is at the very end, there's a wolf and it's going to kill all the Asgardians, Fenris. So he like flops down onto the Bifrost and he's just there for a bit, and then he transforms into the Hulk. But it's such, oh my god, I was in absolute kinks. It's so funny. So that's a really good scene. Oh god, Taika Waititi's comedy is just, oh, it's so intense. So that's basically what happens in Thor Ragnarok, and then at the end we see them cause Ragnarok intentionally because it's the only way they can defeat Hela. So they let Surtur, destroy Asgard. But at the very end, we see Loki when he's going to get the crown of Surtur to let him destroy Asgard. He runs past the Tesseract, which is the Space Stone, and you don't know if he picks it up, but it's pretty much assumed that he has picked it up, and then we find out later he has picked it up. God of Mischief, of course, he has. So that's quite important. Anyway, they destroy Asgard, and then Thor's a bit like, shit, I'm the king now. I'm going to have to find a new home for my people. So they decide to go to Earth, and they're going to go to Norway most likely. And that's where the film ends. But the post-credit scene, they decide on where they want to go. Loki saying, I don't think going to Earth with me is a good idea given his past on Earth. And then all of a sudden a massive ship just comes down in front of them, and you're like, fuck, who is this? And we know that it's Thanos. So it's going to move into Infinity War, like it picks up kind of straight from the end of that film. But before that, we've got Black Panther. But Black Panther doesn't take place in 2018, it actually takes place in 2016. So it's a week after Civil War, basically, where we were introduced to Black Panther. And it's about T'Challa, who returns to Wakanda because he's going to become the new king, basically, because his dad was killed, unfortunately. So it's kind of his origin about not his origin of being Black Panther, but his origin of, taking over Wakanda and things like that. So Wakanda isn't a real place. It's like a hidden nation. Nobody knows it exists. It's really, really advanced. That's where vibranium, which is what Captain America's shield is made of, that's where it comes from. So basically, they're just really, really advanced. So they hide it from the world because they don't want the world to get access to their technology. They're quite isolationist. They like, let's protect our own people. So we're introduced to that, and Black Panther, he becomes king. He's, think he's just being king for a bit, and then an old enemy of Wakanda, somebody who had actually previously discovered Wakanda and used loads of the vibranium and sold it on the black market to make weapons. Ulysses Claw, we first see him in Avengers: Age of Ultron. So he's played by Andy Serkis. And we see him, he kind of pops up on the radar and everything like that. So Black Panther's like, all right, I'll go and get him. And his friend Wakabi, one of the two, is basically like, well, he killed my dad, so either kill him or bring him back to be killed or like punished. Like he definitely needs to be punished. So Black Panther, Nakia, who's like his girlfriend, and Okoye, who's the head of the Dora Milaje, go to, what country did they go to? I don't know what country it is. They go to a casino basically, and that's where the deal's going down, where Andy Serkis's Ulysses Claw is. So they go there and they have a like good old fight, and they bump into Martin Freeman's character, who we were also introduced to in Captain America's Civil War. And he's like not really helping them out, but he kind of helps them catch Andy Serkis. Then they've got him in like a prison and they're trying to interrogate him, but obviously Martin Freeman knows nothing about Wakanda, and Andy Serkis kind of lets on the fact that it's a lot more advanced than people know about. So that sort of happens, and then as that's happening, he's being interrogated. There's a big explosion, and we see Eric Killmonger. So he's the other villain who's working with Claw, and he breaks Claw out basically. He's very knowledgeable on like Wakanda and like Wakandan artifacts and everything like that. So he's an interesting character. So we see him, and in the process, Nakia almost gets shot, but Martin Freeman jumps in front of her and takes the bullet to the back. So it's basically going to paralyze him or kill him. So even though they hate taking other people to Wakanda, and other people shouldn't know that Wakanda exists in like the way it does, like people know it exists, but they just think it's like a really poor country. But they take Martin Freeman back because Shuri, who is T'Challa's sister, is probably the most intelligent person in the MCU. She's really, really smart. So they kind of take Martin Freeman back to be healed by Shuri. Oh, I forgot to mention, at the end of Civil War, Bucky Barnes is actually taken to Shuri in Wakanda to be frozen while she works on how to heal his like mind manipulation and brainwashing type of thing. So Bucky's actually there, but we don't see him in this film. We just see him right at the end. So Martin Freeman's there, and Shuri basically fixes him, but Wakabi's really pissed off because obviously Andy Serkis hasn't been killed. And he hasn't been brought back either, and obviously they're a bit wound up because they bring in like foreigners into Wakanda, which they shouldn't be doing. So what happens from there is we see Eric Killmonger, Andy Serkis's partner, actually kills Andy Serkis's character, Ulysses Claw, and you're a bit like, oh, what's going on here? And anyway, he shows up in Wakanda and he says, listen, I've bought you this guy that you wanted dead. I've already killed him for you, so let me into the throne. We kind of get him in the throne room, and he admits, not admits, like reveals his true identity. So T'Challa's father had a brother, so they were both like kind of heir to the throne equally, but obviously T'Challa's father was like actually became the Black Panther. So his brother though had a son, which is Eric Killmonger, but they lived in Auckland, so he didn't really know anything about Wakanda. He'd never been to Wakanda. He'd heard stories from his father, and T'Challa's father was actually quite not a bad man, but he basically killed his own brother because his own brother had kind of betrayed Wakanda, and then he knew his brother had a child, with like without a mother type of thing, and he left the child there to just vent for himself, free like fend for himself. So Eric Killmonger was obviously very upset, very angry because he's been kept away from his home. His dad, he was a young boy and he came into his house and found his dad dead, and like just he's had a horrible life, you know. So he challenges T'Challa and basically beats him in combat, kills Zuri, who's like one of the like mystic and like not ruler, but he's like very well known in Wakanda. He's like one of the top guys in Wakanda. I don't really know what to call it by like tribes, but he's like one of the head guys basically. Um, so Eric Killmonger basically becomes the king. But he wants to use the technology that they have to basically have wars and like use it for destructive purposes and like get back on like the people who have mistreated poor black people in the past. He's like, oh, we need to destroy them now, even though they might not be doing it now. They've done it in the past. He's still like, now we have to destroy them now. And, you know, he's just going to cause chaos and like cause loads of wars and everything like that. So he's basically king and he starts instigating that. And then thankfully T'Challa isn't actually dead. He's been found by the Jaburi tribe, which is like led by what's his name? In the comics he's called Manape, but they didn't go with that because it's a bit like it seems a bit racist. Fucking hell, what's his name? Oh no, that's really gonna piss us off now. I'm sure Winston Duke is the actor. Oh, I can think of the chant that they do in my head, but I can't think of his name. Um, oh, that's really frustrating. Somebody please let me know down below in the comments because that's really going to piss us off. I'm still trying to think of it. Nah, I can't get it. I can't get it. Oh, that's so annoying. They basically go to him and he's found Black Panther. Well, his fishermen have found Black Panther. I can't concentrate now because I really want to get his name. Nah, come on, Brady. Right, just get over it, get over it. Yeah, so he's found T'Challa. So basically, they heal T'Challa back up, and he goes to fight Eric Killmonger, and then basically we get a big end battle, and ultimately he defeats Eric Killmonger. He says, "Oh, we can save you," because he feels a bit of sympathy for him because he has had a hard life. But Eric Killmonger basically says, "Nah, I don't really want to be saved because if I'm saved, I'm just going to be in jail, and that's not the life I want, you know." So that's basically what happens in Black Panther. Then we come to Infinity War, and this is a bad boy of a film. This is the top dog film. I mean, Endgame as well, but like Infinity War. Oh, it's a good one. It's a good one. It's my favorite. So basically, in Infinity War, it picks up straight away with where we left off with Thor, but rather than them being all okay, we see loads of them are pretty much dead. Loads of the Asgardians are dead, and we see Thanos is on the ship. Thanos already has the purple stone, which is the power stone. So we don't know at this point how he's got it, but he's got it. Yeah, so he's already got that. Then he basically has a bit of a fight with Thor, Loki, and the Hulk, and then Loki sacrifices the Tesseract. Well, he doesn't sacrifice it, but he sacrifices it, then thinks the Hulk's going to beat him up, but then the Hulk gets sparked out by Thanos, and then Heimdall sends the Hulk down to Earth to warn the Avengers on Earth or whoever's on Earth that Thanos is coming, basically, because he's a massive threat. So because Heimdall did that, Thanos kills him, which is really sad. Idris Elba, oh my god, with them dreadlocks, love it. And Loki also gets killed, which obviously means Thanos also gets the Space Stone. He blows up their ship, and you think Thor must be dead, but Thor's hard. He is a tough guy, so he survives it. Thank fuck. Then we go back to Earth and we see Iron Man and stuff. Obviously, Bruce Banner and Doctor Strange appear to Iron Man, and they're like, "Listen, Thanos is gonna come." Iron Man at first doesn't believe Doctor Strange. He's like, "Who is this guy?" Thinks he's a magician. Who the fuck is this? But then when he sees Bruce Banner, who he hasn't seen for years and years, he's like, "Shit, this is serious." So they go back to the Sanctum Sanctorum, and they explain what the Infinity Stones are and kind of what that, like, who Thanos is. Bruce Banner says Thanos is the guy who sent the Chitauri with Loki in the invasion of New York in the first Avengers and all that type of stuff. So we see that happening. Then Thanos' children, the Black Order, two of them, so Ebony Maw and Cull Obsidian, come down and start battling Tony Stark, Doctor Strange, Wong, and it would have been the Hulk, but he can't transform, so it's basically Bruce Banner, so he's not very helpful in the fight, to be honest. And they start having a battle. Spider-Man also gets involved in that, so they're basically trying to get the Time Stone off Doctor Strange, but he's got it in his necklace and he won't let go of it. So they end up capturing him. Tony Stark flies up, gets in the ship with them to try and help Doctor Strange, and Spider-Man also tags along and gets a new suit because he can't survive in space, so Tony has designed him a suit for space. So they go off. Then we see the Guardians of the Galaxy, and they end up bumping into Thor, quite literally, like he lands on their windshield when he's sparked out. They get him in, and he basically explains Thanos got the purple Infinity Stone because he had destroyed Xandar, which is where the Guardians had left it in the first Guardians of the Galaxy film. He completely decimated there and got it before the events of the film start. So he's got that, and he's also got the Space Stone, which was from the Tesseract. So Thor's basically like, he's really powerful, I need to make a weapon. So him, Rocket, Raccoon, and Groot all go off to a place called Neverdalia, where the giants forged the weapons. So that's where Mjolnir was forged, and that's where Stormbreaker, which is Thor's new axe, that's where that is formed as well. So they go on a mission there. At the same time, Gamora, Quill, Mantis, and Drax all decide to go to the Collector on Nowhere to get the ether or prevent Thanos from getting the ether, basically. When they turn up, Thanos already has the ether. He tricks them, makes them think he hasn't got it, and makes them think that Gamora has actually killed Thanos, but she definitely hasn't. Then he captures Gamora, and you think, is it maybe because she's just his daughter, or what does he want from her? So that happens. And then there's a few scenes with like Thanos and obviously everything like that, Thanos and Gamora. So basically, the only stone that we haven't seen in the MCU is not the time stone, the soul stone, which is the orange one. So basically, Gamora found out where the soul stone was. She's the only person that knows where it is, basically, and Thanos wants to know where it is because he needs it. So he takes Gamora and tortures her sister Nebula because he loves Gamora but he doesn't like Nebula. So he decides, I'll torture Nebula, which will in turn torture Gamora emotionally so she'll reveal where the Soul Stone is. So he does that and she actually reveals where the Soul Stone is, and they go to a place called Vormir, which is where the Soul Stone is. But going back to Earth, obviously the Vision has the Mind Stone in his head. He is being chased down by Proxima Midnight and Corvus Glaive, who are trying to get the Mind Stone from him. They have a big fight, but then they end up going back to space or back to the retreat wherever, because as Wanda and Vision are about to get basically beaten, we see Captain America, Natasha Romanoff, Black Widow, and the Falcon come in and save them. They then join up with Rhodey, War Machine, and Bruce Banner, and they're all kind of discussing where they should go. They end up in Wakanda because they need more like armies to help them fight, so they go to Wakanda. So all of that group is in Wakanda. The remaining Guardians end up bumping into Doctor Strange, Iron Man, and Spider-Man, who have crash landed. They've defeated Ebony Maw. They've got rid of him. They chuck him out in space and he dies. They've still got the Time Stone. They end up on a planet called Titan, which is actually where Thanos is from. So Titan is Thanos' home planet, but when they get there, it's destroyed. It's complete mess, shit all. Basically, they end up there and they run into the Guardians there because Nebula, who is being tortured, gets out of being tortured and then contacts Mantis from the Guardians and says, "Meet me on Titan." They all meet. They have a bit of a, kerfuffle, bit of a fight, because they all think they work like each team works for Thanos. They both think they like against each other. Then Drax obviously comes out with his belt line, and then we find out they're working together. They decide to work together, and there's it's just some really funny scenes and everything, but I'll end up going on for ages. I already am. I'm already 35 minutes into this. Like, Jesus Christ, this is going to be a long video. Oh God, I'm gonna start choking again. Yeah, so that happens, and then basically, they're teamed up there, and then we go back to Thanos, and he is obviously with Gamora. So they turn up on Vormir, and it's basically a cliff, and they're not introduced, they're like greeted or welcomed by a cloaked figure, with a German accent. So you're a bit like, oh my God, is that who I think it is? Turns out it's the Red Skull. So the Red Skull at the end of the first Avenger obviously gets teleported to Vormir, I think, and he's been there the whole time and he can't escape. He basically lives his life there. And what we find out is, in order to get the Soul Stone, you have to sacrifice that which you love. Thanos doesn't really love anything, and Gamora starts laughing because she's like, yes, he can't get the stone, he doesn't love anything. And then you realise he actually does love her. And then, yeah, he chucks her off the cliff. So Gamora's a goner. Yeah, so basically, Daddy Thanos chucks his daughter off the cliff, even though it's not his real daughter, but he basically feels like it is, kills Gamora, and then gets the Soul Stone. So he now has the Power Stone, the Ether, so purple, which is power, red, which is the Ether, Space Stone, which is blue, and the orange one, which is the Soul Stone. So all he needs is the green one, which Doctor Strange has, which is the Time Stone, and the yellow stone, which is in Vision's head, which is the Mind Stone. So he then goes to Titan, and we see him battling Doctor Strange, the Guardians, Iron Man, and Spider Man. They all have a battle, and he almost kills Tony Stark. Then Doctor Strange, he's been into the future and seen all the realities, the different versions, how it can play out, and he says there's like 14,560,000 or something along them lines, and they say, how many do we win? And he says only one. So you're like, they've hardly got any chances at all. Tony Stark is basically dying, and Thanos is about to finish him off. And Doctor Strange says, "Spare his life, and I'll give you the Time Stone." Tony Stark says, "No, don't do that," but he does it anyway. So Thanos then has the Time Stone. After that, he goes straight to Wakanda, where the Avengers have been battling his children, the Black Order, and all of their like Ravagers or whatever they're called, like just like alien race, and they're all battling each other basically. And that's a really great scene. Oh, this film is just great scene after great scene. It's just so good. Basically, he's there to get the Mind Stone out of Vision's head. Ultimately, the only way they think they can prevent Thanos is for Scarlet Witch to expose the energy source in Vision's head, the Mind Stone, to an equal power, which is her power. So she basically destroys the stone and it kills Vision, which she's heartbroken about because she's like in love with him. But Thanos has the Time Stone, so he's just like, I'll just do this, reverses time, and then kills Vision himself without destroying the stone, just rips it out of his head, pops it in the gauntlet. So that's when the big snap happens, because Thor, rather than taking his hand or his head off, stabs him in the chest so that he can, be a bit arrogant and be like, I told you you'd pay for that. And Thanos is like, well, you should have gone for the head because it would have killed him probably. Snaps his fingers, and half of the Avengers, half of life in the whole universe, dusts away. It's out of existence. Then Thanos teleports himself so nobody knows where Thanos is. And that's basically what happens in Infinity War. So it's a big one. The post-credit scenes of Infinity War, we see Nick Fury just before he dusts. He's got a pager and he drops it on the floor, and it's got a logo on, and the logo is basically for Captain Marvel. Then we move on to Captain Marvel, but this takes place in the 90s, so it's not in current day. So it's an origin story for Carol Danvers, and she is basically a Kree fighter. She works with the Kree. She's like, she looks human though, and you think, how's she a Kree if she looks human? But yeah, she's a Kree fighter. Anyway, what she realizes is the Skrulls, who are the bad people in the film, actually aren't that bad. The Kree are the bad people, and the Kree have like been preventing the Skrulls from living their life and living with their families and been trying to destroy them and things like that. So Captain Marvel, it's basically about her rediscovering who she is, learning that the people who she's been brought up by, even though she hasn't, it's because they wiped her memories. So the people she knows of from her whole life, which isn't her whole life, it's like 5 years of her life, but it's all she can remember. They've basically manipulated her, they're evil and stuff like that. So in the end, it's basically just about Captain Marvel finding out about herself. not too much goes on. We learn the Skrulls are obviously the good guys and the Kree are the bad guys. And in the end of the film, like we've got Nick Fury in it, and we see how Nick Fury loses his eye. It actually gets scratched out by a cat, which is a bit shit, not gonna lie, but it is what it is. So yeah, not too much to report on this film really. It's just the origin of Carol Danvers. She does get her powers from the space stone though, because that is in a jet and she shoots it, and then that's how she gets her powers. She's probably one of the most powerful in the MCU as well. So it goes to show the people who get their powers from the Infinity Stones, for example, Captain Marvel and Scarlet Witch, they are like two of the most powerful. So if you're powered by the Infinity Stones, you were definitely one of the most powerful, and it just goes to show like how powerful the stones are. So that's what happens in Captain Marvel. But at the very end, in the post-credit scene, well, at the end of the film, Captain Marvel returns to space, which is why we haven't seen her on Earth, because she's just helping everything in space. Obviously, it's like massive out there. Um, so what we see is at the very end, we see the end credit scene, and basically it's just Captain Marvel. This takes place in current days, so after the events of Avengers Infinity War. The Avengers are all crowded around the pager. They're like, shit, what's happened? What is this pager? What was Nick Fury trying to do after the Dustin? Captain Marvel appears and says, where's Fury? That's basically it. Then we move into the second, basically like the second part of Avengers Infinity War, which is Avengers Endgame. So when we pick up, obviously everybody's in a bit of chaos because the Dustins just happened. We see Tony Stark and Nebula, who are in space. Basically, they're in space because they were the only two that weren't dusted, but they're light years away from any jump point, so they're basically going to die. They're running out of oxygen and they're going to die. We see the Avengers on Earth as well, speaking with Captain Marvel, seeing how they can, like, you know, maybe recover Tony or see what's going on elsewhere. Captain Marvel manages to bring Tony and Nebula back just before they die. Tony's basically dying and she luckily shows up. So Nebula and Tony then return to Earth and they're all working together basically. We then see that the stones have been used again by Thanos, so they kind of gather where the energy has come from, where he used them stones because it's such a surge of energy, and they go and visit him. When they go and visit him, they realise that Thanos has destroyed the stones because he wanted to complete his mission. He completed it, and having them around is just for temptation, and it means that what he's done could be reversed, so he decides to destroy them. Oh my god, I forgot Ant-Man and the Wasp. I've forgotten Ant-Man and the Wasp. Can't believe I did that. Sorry, let me just go back quickly. So Ant-Man and the Wasp is pretty much just about going into the quantum realm, which was introduced in the first film to get Janet Van Dyne out. And we find out that like the quantum realm basically has like particles that are like give Janet healing energy, or like they give her like ability, so you think, oh, that's a very powerful realm, and it's just all that type of stuff really. But at the post-credit scene of that, that's around the same time that the Dustin happens. Scott Lang goes into the quantum realm, and as soon as you go in, you're meant to come out straight away, so you don't get caught in a time void or anything like that. Everybody dusts, so there's nobody there to bring him out, so he's basically stuck in the quantum realm. And that ties back into Endgame because Scott Lang is in the quantum realm and he basically gets brought back. Thanos gets killed when the Avengers go and visit him and they realise he's destroyed the stones. Thor chops his head off and he's killed because, you know, he's no use to them. The stones are destroyed, he can't do anything. So then basically it's just a travesty. It jumps 5 years into the future and it's just chaos. Like everybody's unhappy because half their families have died 5 years ago and they just haven't picked up. Like everything's just a shit state basically. They're trying to move on but they can't really, you know, families have died, everything's just gone to shit. So then we see Scott Lang and he basically comes out of the quantum realm. He hasn't aged at all. He goes to the Avengers mansion where he sees Black Widow and Captain America and they're like, how is he alive? Because everybody thought he dusted because nobody knew where he was. And then they say, oh, I'm really sorry that you were stuck in there. That must have been a long 5 years. And he said, yeah, but for me it was only 5 hours. So it kind of hints at the thought of time travel or time working differently. That's when they get onto the concept of maybe we can turn it into a time machine, time travel. So they go and see Tony Stark and see if he will help them. But because this is 5 years in the future, Tony Stark actually has a daughter with Pepper Potts. So them two are like happy, they've got a nice life, and he doesn't really want to go back in time because if he goes back in time, does that mean his future is going to change? And he thinks it's unreliable, like time machine, it's something you see in films, it's not realistically possible. So he turns them down. So they then go to Bruce Banner, the Hulk, who has now become Professor Hulk. So he's really smart as well as being buff and stuff like that, but he doesn't really fight, he's more just intelligent but looks like the Hulk. They go to him and he decides, oh yeah, I'll try and help you do it. So they do a few test runs and it doesn't really work, and it's, a bit like, nah, it's definitely not going to work. But then luckily Tony Stark comes around and he's basically discovered, like not discovered, but found a way to manipulate time. So the quantum realm is the thing that takes them to different time periods, but he designed a watch that lets them choose which time period and where they go to. So that's what Tony Stark designed. So he comes to them and then basically they decide, right, let's do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this right, we're going to go back in time, we're not going to change too much. Basically they decide we're going to go back in time and get all of the stones, bring them back to our reality and snap in our reality, bringing everybody back. Because if we go back in time and manipulate the past, then things in the future will be different, basically, or things in the current day will be different. So they decide that's what they're going to do, like go back, get the stones, and come back to present day, leave everything the same, but snap the people that were snapped out back into reality. God, confusing. So they decide to do that. So they need to put together a team. So what they do is they go and recruit Thor, and he is basically fat Thor. He looks like he's like homeless. He's kind of chubby. He's an alcoholic. He's just down in the dumps. So he comes and tries and helps them, but he's not really helping. They obviously go and recruit Hawkeye, who has become Ronin. He's going around killing loads of people, just because he's killing bad people, and he's saying like if them innocent people were snapped out of existence, they just don't deserve to live. Then you definitely don't deserve to live. So he basically kills them. So he's turned a bit evil, but his family's all died, so you understand why. So they all go on a mission. They all go to different places. We see Bruce Banner, Captain America, Ant-Man, and Iron Man all go back to the original Avengers film. Bruce Banner goes to the Ancient One because she has the Time Stone at this point, and then the Avengers go to the Avenger Tower to try and get the scepter, which has the Mind Stone in. Also, the Tesseract is in that film, so they wanted to get the Tesseract as well. So, Bruce Banner manages to get the Mind Stone off the Ancient One, and the Avengers manage to get the scepter, but not the Mind Stone, but not the Tesseract because they fuck it up, and Loki ends up getting the Tesseract and teleporting himself somewhere where nobody knows. So Ant-Man and Bruce Banner return back to present day, but Captain America and Iron Man go further back in time to when they can get the Tesseract. So they get the Tesseract further back in time, and then they return to the present day, but we don't see them returning back to present day. Then on another mission, we've got War Machine and Nebula, and they've gone to Morag, which is what we see at the beginning of the first Guardians film, where we see Peter get the orb, which contains the Power Stone. So they go and get that, and they manage to get that, but Nebula gets captured by Thanos, basically. Thanos of 2014. So not the present day Thanos, he's dead, but the 2014 version of Thanos. Then on another mission, we see Rocket Raccoon and Thor trying to get the ether, which was inside of Jane, because it's during the event of Thor the Dark World. So Thor's having a breakdown, he goes and speaks to his mum, and then Rocket basically gets the ether out of Jane. We also then have Natasha and Clint, so Black Widow and Hawkeye, and they go to Vormir. They're greeted by the Red Skull, and this is an emotional scene because one of them has to sacrifice themselves. In the end, it ends up being Natasha. She sacrifices herself, and Clint gets the Soul Stone. So everybody's pretty much got the Soul Stone, all their stones. Have they all got? Yeah, they've pretty much all got all the different stones, yeah. So that's all good, but Nebula has obviously been captured, and then they find some pin particles, so Thanos realizes how to shrink and they access her memory files and they realize what's happening. So Thanos from the past understands what he's done in the future and then they're trying to reverse it now. So that makes him angry and he decides, do you know what, I'm just going to have to kill all of Earth so that this can't happen. Basically, because he's like sick. He's like angry that they're trying to undo what he's done, and that he's like, oh, you can't live with what I've done, you can't live with your failure, and it annoys him basically. So they all return to the present day, all the Avengers except Nat because she's been killed, and they're obviously really upset about that. Stark basically manufactures a gauntlet that can hold all of the Infinity Stones, and what we see is he put it in, and Bruce Banner is the only one strong enough to snap his fingers. So he basically snaps everybody who was snapped out back into reality. But Nebula from the past has actually come back to the current day rather than the other Nebula. So she's manipulating the time, the quantum realm, and she lets Thanos from the past come through with his army. So even though they've snapped everybody back into reality and it's really good, Thanos and his army start attacking them. So then it turns into a massive battle at the end of the film over who gets the gauntlet because Thanos is trying to get the gauntlet to destroy all of Earth. So it's a massive battle, and basically Thanos gets the gauntlet. He's about to snap. Tony Stark tries getting it off him. Last attempt, it doesn't work, but then we realise it has worked. We see Tony Stark with all the Infinity Stones, and he snaps. That unfortunately kills Iron Man because it's way too powerful for him. So then at the very end of the film, Thanos is dusted and all of his armies are also dusted. So they're all gone. And then we see, what's his name? I'm not thinking of anybody in particular, not a person. We see the funeral for Tony Stark, and then we see basically everybody's trying to build themselves back up after the devastation, then 5 years where everybody was gone. And it's a nice happy ending. Like Tony Stark's died, but he gets a nice funeral, and it's a nice ending. We then see Steve Rogers because after they've used the stones, they have to return them back to where they'd found them because it would otherwise create branch universes where something bad would basically happen. That's how the Ancient One explains it. So Steve Rogers agrees he'll go back and give the stones back where they got them. He disappears, and rather than coming back like he should, we then see he has decided to stay in the past with Peggy Carter, who was his love interest from the first film, and he's now got old. So Steve Rogers isn't young anymore, he's not Captain America anymore, he's an old man. With this, he then gives his shield to Falcon, so basically he's passing the Captain America mantle to Falcon. So we haven't seen it yet, but Falcon is basically going to be the next Captain America. So that's basically Endgame. After Endgame, the last film of the MCU, the 23rd movie, is Spider-Man Far From Home. And this takes place after the events of Endgame, and obviously people are still trying to pick back up. It's weird going back to school because some of the kids that were younger are now the same age as like Peter Parker and his friends. And it's basically about Peter Parker, and he doesn't want such responsibility because people are putting the responsibility of being Iron Man on him. So it's about him. He goes on a school trip because he doesn't want that responsibility. He doesn't really want to be Spider-Man. He just wants to be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. But after everything that's happened, he needs a break. So he decides to go on a trip and doesn't want to fight. Loads of shit starts happening, and there's a character called Mysterio who's introduced, and he's helping Peter Parker. He basically destroys these villains called the Elementals. Peter Parker's then given a pair of glasses by S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury that are called the Edith glasses, and they control loads of weapons, and Tony Stark had designed them basically, and he gave Peter Parker control of them. But Peter is manipulated by Mysterio, who we think is good at the time, but he's actually bad. And basically, what Mysterio does is ends up getting the glasses off Peter Parker and gains control of all the mass weapons. He hates Tony Stark and he's a villain. He's deciding to he wants to look like a hero to everyone, but he's not a hero, he's a villain, but he wants to look like a hero. So he decides what he's going to do is basically cause massive destructions and then have a projection of him saving loads of people from these massive villains so that people are like, oh my god, he's such a hero. So this happens, and Peter Parker realizes what he's done. Mary Jane, not Mary Jane, her name's not Mary Jane, her name's Michelle. I think it's Michelle Jones, but they call her MJ. So Zendaya's character, she realizes Peter is Spider-Man. He admits it to her, so she now knows he's Spider-Man. At the end of the film, we see, like, obviously Peter Parker realizes what he's done. He realizes that Mysterio is evil, and he goes to fight Mysterio, basically. Realizes he needs to take on this responsibility, even though he doesn't necessarily want to. It is his responsibility to take on. And yeah, that's basically what happens. He defeats Mysterio in the end. Mysterio dies. He gets with MJ, and that's pretty much the event of Far From Home. We also see at the end of Far From Home, in the post-credit scene, that J. Jonah Jameson is back. So the Daily Bugle is back, and he's played by what's his name? J.K. Simmons, I think his name is. He plays J. Jonah Jameson in the original Sam Raimi trilogy. He is back. So he's saying Spider-Man's a menace, he's a killer, and he reveals Peter Parker's identity. So that is a massive cliffhanger ending. So I can't wait for the next Spider-Man movie. That's going to be so good. So basically that's what happens at the end, which is massive. We also then see that Nick Fury wasn't Nick Fury. He was actually Talos from Captain Marvel, who is a Skrull shapeshifter. He's been acting as Nick Fury. We then see Nick Fury's in space with the rest of the Skrull, and he's like running operations up in space. So that might lead into like a sword, sword is basically shield, like Agents of Shield, but Agents of Sword, they deal with the cosmic side of things, so like aliens and all of them type of threats. So we could see that potentially it might be a Disney Plus series, I'm hearing, so that will be good. But yeah, that is all 23 films that we currently have in the MCU. That's a recap. I feel like I've done a really shit job, but I tried my best. My throat is killing. Oh god, I've almost been gone for an hour. My throat is in absolute shit state, I'm not gonna lie. So yeah, I hope it helped a bit. I mean, I know I've gone on for quite a long time, but it's still quicker than watching 23 2-hour movies, because that's what, like 46 hours worth. So even though it's taken me like 2 hours almost, 2 hours in comparison to 46 hours, hopefully that, that'll help you out a little bit. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, even though, I'm not sure how helpful it might actually be. But yeah, so like always, if you could, give this video a like and subscribe to my channel, for more content like this and other types of videos, reviews, breakdowns, history of, all that type of stuff. And yeah, I'll leave my Instagram link in the description below as well, because I do daily watch list and daily reviews of Marvel films on there. So that would be great. And yeah, I hope to see you all in the next one. See you later, guys. Hey guys, just for all of you that made it to the end of the video, I want to let you know that I remembered the name of the guy from Black Panther. He's called Mcu, that's his name. So I was just so happy. So I was like, I'm gonna have to add it in the end because I finally remembered it. So it's Mcu, I remembered.